Hi everyone, thanks so much for joining us. I think we'll have a few people kind of trickling in as we go on, but it's really nice to see you here. So I'm not going to talk for very long because you're not here for me, but thanks all for coming. We've got three very esteemed panelists with us today. We've got Amy, Barry and Banuta. Following the panel discussion, there'll be an opportunity as well for you all to go into breakout rooms with one or the other if you kind of chose to do that in the registration process. But Yan is going to be our Scholar in Residence moderator today, and she's going to introduce all of our speakers properly and get right into the discussion that everyone came for. So Yan, I will hand straight over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Georgie. I was wondering do we want to wait like maybe another just 1 minute and start at 6:05?
Yeah, we can definitely do that.
Yeah, I'm also going to share the link again with our current scholars in residence in our WhatsApp group. So just 1 minute. Very happy to see more folks joining and some familiar faces, some new friends. Really happy to see you all. Thank you for coming, Mary. Really appreciate your being here. Cool. All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here today in what I believe is the first theater artists gathering amongst our alums of its kind. And I'm very, very happy to be moderating this conversation among three of our very esteemed theater veteran alums, and to be introducing you to the season of Fringe at the time of the Edinburgh Festival Fringe and at a time where theater is really coming back. So we're having this conversation on playwriting, directing and creating, but also on, sorry. Is there an issue? Okay, well, and I'm very happy to be moderating this conversation and to talk about theater and also beyond. So we're here today with Amy, Banuta, and Barry, three theater artists who we're very lucky to have in our community. And I also wanted to give a shout out to those of us in the audience who are theater artists, art lovers, advocates for the arts, and those of you who are just interested in dropping by. So I'm going to briefly introduce our three panelists and then get going with some questions. And then also field some questions from the audience. For the last part of this event, we're going to be having breakout rooms with each of our panelists, where you'll get to engage with them on a more personal level. And yeah, so without further ado, Amy Ng is a British Hong Kong playwright, historian, and translator whose plays Under the Umbrella, Shangri-La, Acceptance, and We Like to Move It, as well as her adaptation of Strindberg's Miss Julie have been produced by venues including Belgrade Theatre Coventry, Hampstead Theatre, Finborough Theatre, and also toured around the UK. She has also been produced in Hong Kong and Singapore, and she's under commission to theaters including the National Theatre, the Royal Shakespeare Company, Almeida Theatre, the Young Vic, and many more. She also writes for the radio and translates plays from Chinese into English. While at Oxford, she did a DPhil in history, which focused on multinational empires, imperial decline, and nationality conflict. And her monograph, Nationalism and Political Liberty, has been published by the Oxford University Press. And on to our second panelist, Banuta Rubess, who is an innovative all-rounder artist and one of the first female Rhodes Scholars, who has pioneered feminist theater, diaspora theater, and contemporary opera to national renown in Canada and Latvia. Mute. Yeah, sorry. On to Banuta's bio. Yeah. So Banuta has created blazingly visual works that have knitted together theater, music, and dance, and she has thrown open doors to new generations of theater creators in the country that she's lived in, including the UK, Canada, and Latvia. She has created groundbreaking works at Nightwood Theatre, Theatre Direct, Tapestry New Opera Works, and more in Canada, and staged productions in Latvia, ranging from immersive theater to an adaptation of the Trojan Women performed on a beach. Banuta completed her DPhil in history at Oxford, and she also holds an MFA in creative writing from the University of Guelph. She also teaches theater at the University of Toronto. Our third and final panelist of the day is Barry Edelstein, who is the Erna Vinci Viterbi Artistic Director at San Diego's Old Globe Theater, which is one of the largest nonprofit theaters in the US, and which will soon be sending its 25th production to Broadway, which is its world premiere production of Almost Famous. It also has the largest and most extensive program of theater with incarcerated and justice-involved populations in the United States. Barry has directed a number of esteemed actors, including Gwyneth Paltrow, Uma Thurman, John Turturro, Kevin Kline, Blair Underwood, Richard Thomas, and others. And he is also one of the US's foremost experts on directing and acting Shakespeare, having taught Shakespearean acting at the Juilliard School, NYU, USC, and the Public Theater, and also published the acclaimed Thinking Shakespeare, which is a guidebook for actors, directors, students, and anyone else who's interested in the Bard. And I would highly, highly recommend Thinking Shakespeare myself, having greatly benefited from it. Having read all of these bios, I'm sure you're very excited to engage with our panelists, but I'm also just personally so interested to hear what you all have to say beyond these bios. And so my starting question is, what is your I've got to do this moment as an artist? And what did your time as a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford have to do with it? Does anyone want to kick us off? Shall we? Yeah.
Who's going?
I guess appropriately enough, it started with for these days. It started with Salman Rushdie. So so after the fatwa was declared, there was a conference in Hong Kong, and it was called Asian Voices in English. So it was a conference of like Asian writers writing in English, and I was a student at the time. I think like year 7, Form 1, but somehow I went, and I think I was just so. I guess I had never imagined that like me growing up in Hong Kong that I could write for a global audience, and there was just something also about the seriousness of it, and something about like the mission of a writer and like speaking truth to power. But then there was also this like addenda, which is that I went back to my mother and I was like, oh, that was so inspiring, and all these writers want to do something, like petition about Rushdie. And she's like, well, they're not going to get anywhere. That it's just useless. It's just words, like she was just very against the arts. So I think that probably sparked up my rebellion, thinking, well, I really have to do this. And so I wrote quite a few plays in high school, but then I dropped it, and I didn't start again until Oxford. And I think I'm really grateful to Oxford for that. I guess that kind of atmosphere of cheerful amateurism. Like it didn't really matter, if you weren't, like people just tried everything, like rowing or coxing or like theater, and it didn't, and you didn't have to be like expert at something. So I felt I could like put my stuff out there, like I entered cuppers, and it just went on from there. And then there was a workshop by Carl Miller, who at the time was at the Royal Court Theatre, and for writers when I was at Oxford. And I took his workshop, and years later I ended up sending my first play to the Royal Court Theatre. So there was definitely this direct connection with I guess feeling like I had permission in Oxford to think about a career in the arts, just because there is such a tradition in Oxford of like people going to theatre, even though there isn't any such tradition amongst Rhodes Scholars. So yeah, that's me.
So shall I go next?
Sure thing.
So I, when I came to Oxford, I had a theater ensemble of my own, which I didn't take very seriously because everything was done in Latvian for the Latvian diaspora. And yet I had a big toe in making theater, and I'd caused quite a lot of ripples in the Latvian community with my shows. However, when I went to England, I thought, now I must turn to serious things, and I will not work in theater. I'm just going to try one more thing. And the one more thing is when my tipping point happened. I responded to a very small ad by a man who was 19 at the time, a queer artist called Neil Bartlett, who is very well known in England. And he wanted to put together an ensemble that would work against theater tradition to create 4 shows over the year, ending at the Edinburgh Fringe, all devised, all with no director, none of them in a theater. We would now call them site-specific, all of them exploring interaction with the audience. We might call that immersive. And all of them really committed to the idea that, can theater change anything? Can theater change your mind, your perception? You know, what things are we doing in the theater? Kind of looking at the clock, the workings of the clock. And this was so exciting that it's really all I did in my first year of being a doctoral student. And I would say that was my, it's interesting, Amy, you said the amateur atmosphere, but at the same time, it was quite acceptable to get your theater training in Oxford. I mean, we knew, you know, Simon McBurney was at Cambridge and kind of starting there as well. We were all kind of at the same point. So the other thing I want to mention, though, as well, is that while I was in Oxford, I spent quite a lot of time in Soviet Latvia. And in Soviet Latvia, this police state, it became very clear how powerful art is, how incredibly important poets were, or how full the theaters were, and how everyone was listening for the secret message, or was really happy to be in one space together, which is the power of live theater. And I think that too cemented this feeling of I want to do this.
Thank you so much, Amy and Banuta. Barry, you actually did, I believe, your MPhil in Renaissance drama here at Oxford.
Did. Yeah. I mean, I had I had an experience that I've subsequently learned is fairly typical of young people who get introduced to the theater and have a kind of an epiphany. I grew up in a very suburban upbringing in New Jersey, outside of New York City, half an hour outside of New York City, and my childhood was rich with theater. My parents would take me and my siblings into New York to see a matinee of a Broadway show. But the diet was, musical theater, commercial musicals, Pippin, I remember very vividly when I was a kid. And I really didn't have any sense in my teen years that there was an art theater beyond what Broadway was. I just didn't know, even though I grew up in close proximity to New York City. And in high school, one of the teachers was an avant-gardist whose day job was to teach suburban high school, and directed Shakespeare with the students in this public high school in New Jersey. And it was a shocking, stunning, mind-altering, DNA-shifting experience to find myself in the middle of the words of Shakespeare and the words of Shakespeare inside of me and inside of my consciousness through the theater in that way. Really, truly, like my life before that and my life after that were two different lives. It was like a bolt of lightning hit me. And so I decided at that moment I wanted to pursue this world of Shakespeare in the universe and in 3 dimensions. And through high school and college, started directing and was lucky enough to get a Rhodes Scholarship. And so that's what I read at Oxford. And what was amazing being at Oxford, an hour north of the Royal Shakespeare Company in London, an hour south of the Royal Shakespeare Company in Stratford, and every major Shakespearean in the world coming through Oxford in one way or another. And this was the late 80s when Stephen Greenblatt was just turning into a rock star. And I remember he came and gave some lecture in some hall whose name escapes me. And it was like Springsteen had shown up. I mean, it was people sitting on windowsills, people clamoring to get in. And I had never experienced anything like that. I had never understood that this could be both an emotional phenomenon and an intellectual phenomenon in the same way. And that set the course of the rest of my life, doing what I do, which now is about making art, teaching, evangelizing for the arts as a phenomenon in our culture, as the head of a major nonprofit. You know, it's many parts that all emanate from that same sort of big bang of feeling Shakespeare detonate inside of me as a teenager.
Thank you so much. I loved hearing about all these kind of life-altering moments that are so personal to you, and deeply appreciate your sharing. So I also wanted to ask, as Rhodes Scholars, I think we often face this dilemma of, you know, artists kind of being sidelined in the kind of official narrative or the, you know, general public's perceptions of what a Rhodes Scholar can be. And the scholarship itself is often associated with leadership in law, in medicine, in politics, especially, and in academia, but I think less so with the arts. So what do you think is the significance for you, and I guess for the scholarship, to be choosing the arts as a Rhodes Scholar? And how do you think that the arts relate to all of these themes that we often talk about in relation to Rhodes: leadership, power, achievement, impact, and risk-taking? Does anyone want to go first? Barry?
Yeah, well, sure. Okay, thanks. Yeah, I mean, in my class, 1986, I was the only artist in my class. I'm not 100% sure of this. I think the numbers are maybe a little more robust than that now, maybe not hugely so. I know a handful of theater figures in the United States. I mean, most notably Davis McCallum, another head of a big Shakespeare theater on the East Coast, who's exercising real leadership. And I think that's the point. What I know in my position is that, especially with a significant institution behind me, I feel every day a connection between what the arts can do and leadership in a community, and forging community and bringing disparate communities together around this art form that we make. And so my own personal experience is that, yeah, the political leaders, I mean, in my class, Susan Rice was in my class, you know, and it went on to a distinguished career in national politics and national leadership, journalists, others. But I've never had a problem understanding that what the arts do is provide exactly that same sense of civic enrichment and personal emotional intelligence and enhancement of participation in society, all those things. And it's been part of my own personal platform to help the world understand that the arts can provide that leadership. And you know, I mean, I'm eager to encourage the Rhodes Trust to continue to see artists as absolutely consistent with what the scholarship is trying to do.
And Barry, do you want to talk a little bit further then about the initiatives that the Globe has, especially in relation to the aspects that you just mentioned, like civic education?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. The Globe is, post-pandemic, we are the largest regional theater in the United States, largest nonprofit theater outside of New York City. And we have 3 theaters, and we produce a lot of material, including Broadway shows and Shakespeare and new plays and classics. So theater production is the core of our work, but our platform at the Globe is that theater is a public good. And we try and understand that what the theater can do is enrich the quality of life in a city, enrich civic participation. And so this leads us to all kinds of things. One, a platform of arts engagement programming where we actually go to underserved, marginalized, disenfranchised communities all over San Diego County. And so it's incarcerated populations and refugee populations and senior populations and unhoused populations, justice-involved populations, veterans here in San Diego, huge population of veterans, many traumatized in very deep ways. And so we partner with something now like 60 community-based nonprofits doing participatory theater making work in these communities to try and enlarge the idea of what participation in a nonprofit arts institution can look like. Then we have an actor training program that we run with the University of San Diego. We have a robust new play development program where we're commissioning and developing new plays very frequently by writers whose voices are underrepresented in the mainstream of the American theater. So it's a big umbrella over this idea that the theater can provide meaning, can forge connection, that the theater can be a gathering place, a meeting place of community, a place that forges individuals, strangers into one thing, which is an audience. And that's a huge part of how the Globe thinks about itself, and how the Globe thinks about what a nonprofit arts institution in a major American city can actually do. Yeah, it's wonderful. And we're not alone in all of this stuff, but given our size and given our prominence, we have been able to model programming approaches and best practices for other theaters around the country, which again is that sort of leadership idea that even in the way we conceive of the relationship between our theater and our city, we're providing models for the field. So I encourage everybody to check out our website. You can, theoldglobe.org, you can find out more stuff. And of course, if you're ever in San Diego, come by and say hi. Love to have you. As you were, Yan, not too long ago.
Yes, I was in the summer just before I came to Oxford, actually, and I felt very fortunate to be there. Thank you so much, Barry. It's really inspiring to hear about all these initiatives. Banuta, Amy, do you want to pick up that question about choosing arts as a Rhodes Scholar and commenting on arts and leadership?
Maybe I'll stay in the middle. Can I stay in the middle? I find it very irksome that in Barry's year there was only one artist, and it's amusing to me that in my year I think there were 2 poets plus me, and I think it's because women were being brought in and nobody really knew what to do with us. We who are the artists are at Rhodes Scholars know that we feel like we're marginalized within this group, and the scholarship has a kind of a blind spot towards the arts, and I think it has a lot to do with the way that the scholarship is still very much in love with power. Leadership isn't necessarily power. Leadership, it can be sharing power or having authority. And artists who are not in the theater, I've just put them aside, let's say a poet, a writer, is wielding often against authority and is trying to undermine the powers that be, or a certain way, a status quo thinking, which Rhodes is ostensibly interested in. The theater leadership, I found this question so interesting because to be a leader in the theater, people think the director decides everything, and any director knows that without the stagehand who will do it on time, and without the actor who will open up, and without a whole series of people, including the audience, there's nothing. So it's a very different, it's not me the great man or me the great woman alone, though we tend to do that to our artists and turn them into the great man and the great woman. I have frequently talked to other Rhodes, the few even liberal arts writer, literary types among Rhodes, to say why is it that we aren't respected that much by the committee, the scholarship itself, but also we don't like telling the world that we're Rhodes Scholars, because in our worlds, Rhodes scholarships have zero value. And I know that when I've gone to Rhodes Scholar parties where there's get-togethers, the other Rhodes Scholars are really shocked when I say that. The fact that my Rhodes doesn't open the door to every theater I want to go to, but can in fact close it. So I think this is a really good question that we can just keep kicking around, and I'll pass it on to Amy.
Yeah, so it's a question that I've struggled with kind of personally and philosophically. I think, apart from those values of leadership and I think that the subtext, well, I think, to be a Rhodes Scholar, you've pretty much been on a fast track your entire life. You've been like, alpha and ambitious, and, depending on, which constituency you are, it can get really extreme. But then when you're an artist, especially, you know, I'm like, as a writer, it's not a linear path. And there were years when like I felt like I was just kind of tapping in the dark, trying to give form to like what I was feeling, you know, trying to find my way in an industry where structurally freelancers just aren't given much agency, you know. So I think it was almost like an unlearning of everything that had brought me to the Rhodes Scholarship, you know, just that very focused, driven way of doing things. So I felt I had to let go of a lot of that. I completely agree with Banuta that like the Rhodes Scholarship means absolutely nothing in the world of theatre, at least definitely here in London. And it's and for me, because I deal a lot with, you know, issues of colonialism and post-colonialism, it is that added burden of, you know, what is my relationship to Cecil Rhodes' legacy? So there's, I mean, on the one hand, so there's all that, you know, on a personal level, and also philosophically. I mean, I look at my peers and my Rhodes peers, and, you know, a lot of them, you know, have come a long way in politics. You know, they're ambassadors, or they're, you know, like they're really distinguished in national politics or in the UN, or you know, they're captains of industry or they're captains of finance, and these people have real power to affect like multitudes. You know, they can. It almost feels like with one signature or like with one transaction, you know, like people lose their jobs, or they like, or you know, they lose their security, and sometimes I do feel like. I know that one of the slogans in the Hong Kong protests in 2019 was that ideas are bulletproof. And sometimes I question that a lot. You know, I'm like, well, but actually, these people have the power to erase memories, to silence us. And so, and, you know, and of course, then I always come back to but, you know, it's not a measure, it's not a thing about it's not even about the moral authority of an artist, but it's more like it's just your mission to, you know, speak truth to power. And it's not really my job to measure the impact of that. So philosophically, yeah, that's a real struggle for me some days.
Thank you so much, Amy. I thought that was a very thought-provoking answer. And I guess all of these answers have kind of touched upon, you know, the relationship between arts and other fields as well, right? And I just wanted to build up from the previous question and, you know, ask, theater has informed obviously the ways that you think and do things and has changed your own personal lives. What do you think are some of the ways in which the arts and theater in particular can inform ways of thinking and doing in other fields? And if you were standing before, you know, your politician classmates, for example, how would you, you know, what are the kind of lessons that you might try to impart to them?
I said this already yesterday, so I have to say it right away. And Zelensky is my example. So, you know, because everything Zelensky is doing for Ukraine comes from the fact that he is an actor, that he had his own company as an actor, that he's surrounded by screenwriters, and that he knows how to talk to people. Those are, I mean, I think art from Shakespeare to us, theater is all about trying to understand people and getting into another person's skin, getting into their thinking, into their way of thinking and understanding them. So I think that's the source of, you know, the great driver of theater. The other thing I want to say is that when we think of how does this inform other sources, other pursuits, you know, even if I click on Twitter and I see a meme like Dark Brandon, that is, I hope you know what I mean. You know, it's a version of Biden with lasers shooting from his eyes. That's a silly thing, it seems, and yet it's part of popular culture. And that image comes from whoever created the first, you know, who wrote the science fiction books, who made the cartoons, who made the images for comics. We're constantly surrounded by art. Everything we look at, the construction of your room, the color of your shirt, somewhere along the line, an artist has touched that, or someone has design something based on being inspired by an artist. They are everywhere. So I'll finish now.
Barry?
For me,
Or
oh,
Amy?
sorry. For me, it's about, I feel that, theatre in particular, it can create empathy for characters that are so far from yourself, so I find it really radical and subversive if, say, like I had an audience that were like the movers and shakers, like something like the National Theatre, the kind of people that go to there. And if I can create like real empathy with, a colonial subject, or like somebody who's oppressed, or somebody that like they wouldn't usually give the time of day to, I feel that that's a really powerful thing, and that changes the way that people think, or the way, or more powerfully, the way they feel. So that's usually my answer. And most days I believe it.
Yeah, Amy, I remember watching your adaptation of Miss Julie and how it was set in Hong Kong under British colonial rule, and how it just made me see that play in an entirely new light. And also, made me, like you said, made me feel empathy for John, for the male character, for the male servant character, whom I hadn't felt much empathy for in Swinburne's original. So kudos to you on that. And Barry?
Well, I'm so grateful to my co-panelists here. It's such a provocative set of things to think about. I will answer with a couple of anecdotes. Right now, the Old Globe is producing a musical adaptation of a movie known as DDLJ. It's the biggest Bollywood movie ever made. It was made in 1995. It's still running in Mumbai. It is a legendary and incredibly powerful film in South Asian culture. And we're partnering with the movie studio that made the film in 1995, which is a $12 billion company. The Old Globe, as the largest theater company in the United States outside of New York, is a $40 million company. And so, we have to accept that the theater is a marginal practice. We are small, we are tiny. We're not, early in my career, I hit a crossroads where people were saying, go to Hollywood, go to Hollywood, go to Hollywood, because you will have a much bigger platform on which to tell these stories. And I never did. I didn't want to. In this work, when we put on this musical, if you want to see it, you got to show up in Balboa Park at 8 o'clock and sit in seat G114. It's a local phenomenon, right? It is not a national phenomenon. It's a small practice. 650 people will be sitting and watching it. The other end of the spectrum is that 3 weeks ago, we do a big program in a maximum security prison here in Southern California called St Antony State Prison. It's out in the middle of the desert, middle of nowhere, 2 hours from here. And it's a place where seriously violent felons are convicted for seriously heinous crimes. And 20 guys take a Shakespeare class for an hour a week that they volunteer for over the course of 10 or 12 weeks. And I went out there for the final presentation. And of those 20 guys, 2 guys have some kind of profound personal change that happens to them. And so we have to hold in our minds that really we're small and we're intimate and we're touching individual people on an individual level. But the power of the change that can happen in an individual is enormous, right? And that's it's like the Shakespeare line about a great reckoning in a little room, like big things happen in the theater, but its reach is small. And I think that that's the secret. And if you can see that as a feature and not a bug, then there are extraordinarily powerful things that can happen in a community.
Thank you so much for sharing those anecdotes, Barry. And so speaking of a community building, functions of theater and the liveness of theater and all those things that are really essential to theater, I'm just thinking back to the last couple of years, which I know is a really painful subject for many, if not all of us. And the pandemic has really led to strong setbacks for live performance and livelihoods in theater. And at the same time, I also think that those conditions have really challenged artists, right, to think about what are the fundamental qualities, what are the essential qualities of theater and the purposes of theater. And so I'm just wondering if I can also ask, how have each of you kind of responded to that challenge during these times?
Well, I'll jump in since my mic is open and just say, you know, I mean, I experienced this thing on a couple of different levels. The Globe's a big employer. You know, we are one of the largest arts employers in California, and so a lot of people were kicked out of work, and it was brutal. I mean, just on a sort of human level of like, how are these people who come to work at the Old Globe going to pay their rent during this terrible, terrible time? It was really, really, really ugly. And people left the field and people moved out of San Diego, and we really struggled to figure out how we could keep the lights on. The American government came to the rescue, but late. Eventually there was a program passed called the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant, which was a massive $16.5 billion rescue package for the live performing arts, and that's why we're still here. And so, you know, elsewhere around the world, governments stepped in quicker. Here, it was scary and terrifying for a very long period of time. And the fact that we're intact is largely because of that, and also because of philanthropists who came to the rescue to say, we don't want to see this wonderful arts institution that delivers so much meaning to the community damaged. So my primary recollection of the last 2 years has been this deep, deep anxiety about the people who work for me and keeping them intact. And it's been horrifying. I mean, I'm not going to soft pedal it. It's just been a wretched, wretched, terrible couple of years. On the other hand, when we came back to life, we were one of the first, we have an outdoor theater. One of the 3 venues at the Globe is an outdoor Shakespeare theater. And therefore we were able to open up really early. Like, you know, late spring of 2021. And we were one of the first places in California to hold a public performance again because it was deemed safe to do so outdoors. And what I saw happen in that space, the sense of joy and relief and the sense of, oh my God, I can be around another human being again, and I can share in a story, and I can laugh, and I can celebrate, and I can experience joy in a public way, you know, that was as thrilling as the terror and awfulness of the shutdown was debilitating, you know? So we're back and we're trying to figure it out, and it's tough and it's bumpy. And I can tell you, the people really want to come out and see funny stuff. Hard to do Ibsen at this moment in time, very tricky. But, you know, people want to see singing and dancing and laughing and joy. And so I'm happy to provide that and get my people back to work. But it was a tough, miserable time, and one that still isn't over, but seems maybe to be receding.
Thank you, Barry. I just also wanted to say that your broadcasts of Shakespearean sonnets, which I think were like occurred on a frequent basis in the early days of the pandemic, really provided solace to me as I was being locked down in Oxford, and I'm sure it was also very
that's nice.
to many others. And I just want to say that knowing this, that you were operating right under all of this uncertainty and anxiety, you know, as a leader, and still managing to provide that to your audiences, I think is a really valuable thing.
That's very meaningful. Thanks, Yan. Yeah, we decided that one way to keep our people on the payroll was to be doing digital content, having no idea whether anybody would see it, but it just allowed us to keep people working, so we did it.
Yeah, absolutely. And Banuta, I believe you also have some experience with digital content.
I do. I want to make a couple of comments. One is that when, for me personally, I have to say it's terrible, but COVID was actually pretty good because I had to write, and it forced me to write, and I couldn't do this and I couldn't do that. I wrote. However, I also taught. I taught directing and acting, and you know, you maybe can imagine how to teach acting on Zoom, but directing, oh my God, I had no idea how would I do that. How would I teach all these 25 people? what directing is. And yet it was such a revelation to me as to the ability for and the joy of creativity. Because when you look at that Zoom box, it is a proscenium stage. Barry's got a nice, lots of space behind him. He could go behind, he can go down to the right, to the left. I can get a costume if I want. I can change my looks very easily. I can bring in a prop, and make something fly through the air and you don't know what it is. I mean, we can make all sorts of events happen. That's one thing we discovered, even online. And that the challenge of nothing, I don't know about you other artists, but for me as a theater artist, some of the best shows I ever saw was in a space that had 50 seats and it's just a black box, because every artist has to overcome this challenge rather than, when I don't know who Julie Taymor gets X million dollars for Spider-Man and it actually doesn't necessarily serve her purpose. So I discovered that fire that we need of creativity once again. I discovered that for my students, those 3 hours where they were given tasks to create something online were like a lifeline for them, because we were making something. We made something every time we got together. We made something for each other. But I also want to comment on a professional art product that I saw that comes from this time. I'm right now engaged in trying to bring over a feature-length opera film. It's a Latvia-German co-production. It's made by a very indie female director from Berlin, and it wasn't meant to be on film. It's because of COVID that half of it is done on film. It's a 3-hour piece. It's amazing. And when I saw it, because it has exteriors and interiors, I told the artists, COVID was a gift to you. This is what you did by putting these scenes outside rather than just running it for 6 nights, which is probably all you could have afforded in a space. You made an object that you can now, they are doing the live production too now, but that recorded version is one that will last. And finally, I want to say to Barry's point about the joy, one of the things that I noticed was here at the Fringe, we also have a very lively Fringe in Toronto, where I see a lot of my recent graduates, like people in their 20s, making theater. And as a rule, as theater is expensive, right? So people tend to make 1-man shows, 2-man shows. We can't afford more. So for the first time, I saw 18-member casts on stage in the Fringe regularly, because people just wanted to do it. I think they wanted to go big and they wanted to just act their buns off, basically. And the audience is extremely responsive to this. So just to say, there's the good side and there's the bad side. I am very glad, Barry, your theater survived, because there's no question that many people had to quit.
Thank you so much, Banuta. And Amy?
Yeah, so I mean, the COVID lockdown time was terrible, the financial worries and, homeschooling young kids and all that. But I think artistically, I guess I was just really aware of how fragile and how ephemeral, our art form is. That, there were all these plays that had to be shut down all of a sudden in March 2020, and years in the Genesis, and have 2 performances and it's just shut down overnight, and some of them haven't come back. And then, and it made me also aware of how do we secure an afterlife or legacy of a show? So my Miss Julie, the run finished on the 13th of March 2020, but it was supposed to tour. So I'm really glad it got its full run. But obviously the tour then happened for a year and a half. But when it did happen, then it was filmed with a 5-camera setup. So, yeah, I know, it was a pretty state of the art, and that would never have happened before. And that was live streamed around the world. So that did mean a lot to me, because it also meant that, it could play in Hong Kong, because it was set in Hong Kong. And of course, at a very peculiar time, 7 p.m. UK time is 1 a.m. Hong Kong time. But, whenever theoretically people could watch it. So there was that, you know, something good came out of that. But I guess I saw a lot of very ingenious experiments over Zoom with theatre, you know, like, you know, there's a lot, like you say, Banuta, a lot can be done with it. And so I think that's become a hybrid art form. But for me, like, it could never, I mean, I was just really missing that liveness and that like communal thing. And I think when I went back into the rehearsal room afterwards, I just had this feeling like I am never going to take this for granted. You know, this is like such a gift, and it can be taken away any moment, because, you know, there's like all these variants of COVID, and now there's monkeypox and like goodness knows what else, you know. So it's just, I mean, I think sometimes, you know, we, you know, at some point in our careers, we get on this like treadmill, you know, where you're like, you know, you're always rushing to get something into production, and, you know, then it's like, it's always too short, the rehearsal period, then it's tech week, and then it's like all these previews, and it's so nerve wrenching, and then it's all over really soon, and then you have to think about the next production. And it was just having that time to pause and be like, well, actually, maybe this is not the way to do it. And so I am a bit disappointed that, you know, all those good resolutions during COVID time about theatre coming back better have not on the whole happened. I think people are still in firefighting mode, obviously. And I mean, I don't know how it is in the US and in Canada, but here, like, productions keep on getting shut down because of COVID. And so there was a devised show at a major theatre here in London, and I'm not going to name which one, and they structured it dramaturgically, so it was modular. So it was a series of two-handers, and so even if, you know, one of the actors had COVID, like the rest of the cast, it would just affect one cast member and not the rest of the cast, which I thought was really ingenious as a kind of IKEA model, but it was not a good model dramaturgically. It really wasn't. So yeah, we know we're back to like, I mean, I feel like we're back to normal in terms of the you know, the under-resourced nature of the industry, and the constant haste and the constant pressure, and also, you know, the pressure from funders, especially like in the UK, the theatres were rescued by the government, who wanted something in return. They were like, well, you have to express gratitude to us, or whatever, you know, and that obviously didn't sit very well with a lot of the artists. So I feel it's gone back to normal in the negative sense, but it hasn't gone back to normal in that you can't, I mean, I'm amazed at how there are 18 cast play. Because, I mean, sometimes I feel like I never want to watch like monologue plays ever again after this year. So it hasn't gone back to normal in like the good artistic sense. So if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think the future of theater is a question that we all collectively have to grapple with. So with a few minutes left, I was wondering if we can go into the breakout rooms.